Thank you to the Baseball Hall of Fame and SABR for organizing this week's great events. It's been so funny to come here and meet people in person that I'd only emailed with. Last night, somebody said to me, I pictured you being a little bit taller. Sorry. My interest in Cannonball Reading started in 2014. I was working on an article for Sporting News about the first Negro League players inducted in the Hall of Fame. And I came across this on newspapers.com. It's from the New York Daily News in 1971. Its lead says, these are the, quote, 12 players observers of the Negro Leagues agree are the leading candidates for selection to the Hall of Fame. And here are those 12 players. As you can see, these are some of the most successful and most famous players in the history of the Negro Leagues. Another thing you'll notice is that almost all of them have since been elected to the Hall of Fame. Dick Cannonball Reading is the only one who hasn't. So that made me more curious at the time to learn more about Reading. I've broken down today's presentation into 3 sections: Reading the pitcher, Reading the person, and endorsements from big names who saw him firsthand. The prime of Reading's career was 1911 through 1921, pretty long time span. And within that 11-year window, Reading was dominant. I searched the Seamheads Negro Leagues database for the totals within that 11-year window, and Reading had the most wins, most complete games, most shutouts, and most strikeouts. As Ted noted earlier, some of these numbers are evolving. That's as of a few days ago. What did Reading look like on the mound? I found that sources varied on his size, anywhere from 6'1" to 6'4", anywhere from 210 pounds to 245 pounds. And as you can see in his New York Lincoln Giants photo, he had big hands. That was confirmed by Hall of Famer Judy Johnson, who said, quote, his hands look like shovels. Descriptions of Reading's delivery say that he sometimes turned his back to the hitter and twisted around before whipping in fastballs. And that fastball was legendary. He was compared to the best American League and National League pitchers of his era. As Frank Forbes said, Dick Reading was like Walter Johnson, nothing but speed. That's the reason they called him Cannonball. He just blew the ball right by you. I've seen Reading knock the bat out of a man's hand. Forbes played with Reading with the New York Lincoln Giants. Reading was also called the Black Matty, a reference to the great Christy Mathewson of the New York Giants. Reading's velocity also had its share of myths. There's a story out there that Reading took a brand new baseball, fired it against a brick wall, and the ball broke apart. That one may be apocryphal, but I like it because it shows the mystique and the flavor around Reading's fastball. When researching for Reading's SABR Bioproject bio, it was always exciting to find an article that quoted him. He died in 1948, so regrettably there aren't as many known interviews with him as other Negro League or pre-Negro League stars. But here's one. Late in Reading's career, he pitched an exhibition game in Burlington, Vermont. He shared his pitching philosophies with a reporter. This whole article was a good read, but the best part I thought was when he said, quote, I found out by practical experience that the best exercise in the world to develop an arm to hurl the fast ones is to chop wood. And in researching Reading, I found he was someone who thought a lot about pitching, the art of pitching, and training techniques. I think a player's fame in their era is part of their Hall of Fame case, and Reading definitely had that. This headline from Buffalo in 1920 is one of many that I found promoting his appearance in a city. He was a draw. People bought tickets just to see him. He was also durable. Multiple books and articles mention that Reading would pitch both games of a doubleheader. According to the Afro-American newspaper, on July 23, 1927, Reading once pitched 22 scoreless innings in one game for the Baccarat Giants. They didn't worry about pitch counts when it came to Cannonball. 22 innings in one day. Of Reading's 254 starts in the Seamheads Negro Leagues database, 209 were complete games. Reading was superstitious. He wore the same sweatshirt to pitch 5 days in a row, according to Frank Forbes. And Forbes said at the end of the 5 days, that sweatshirt could stand up by itself. Judy Johnson said that if Redding lost a game, he'd buy a new glove, as if the glove had anything to do with it. Redding reportedly didn't wash his jersey at all during his 20-game winning streak in 1915. Redding started hundreds of games over 22 professional seasons. He called his perfect game for the Lincoln Giants against Jersey City in 1912 his favorite. It was at Olympic Field in New York City. Jersey City's lineup included major leaguers like Mike Donlin, who had batted .316 in 77 games for the Pittsburgh Pirates earlier that year. Redding struck out 19 batters, and the remaining 8 were all retired on lightly hit groundouts. His battery mate was Hall of Famer Louis Santob. Redding said, quote, "I just buzzed that old cannonball right past them." And reflecting on the 19 strikeouts, he dreamed aloud in the article about striking out all 27. He said, quote, "I could have struck out the entire team. What a record that would have been." Speaking of striking out almost every batter, in that same 1912 season, Redding was pitching for the Lincoln Giants and struck out 24 batters in one game. It was against the All-Leaguers, a team composed of players from the Metropolitans and the Washington United States League team. Redding gave up just 3 hits in that game. John Holloway reported that Redding was credited with pitching 30 no-hitters in his career. The quality of opponents varied. For example, I saw one in an archive that he pitched against a local club in Mobile, Alabama in 1917. But some of his no-hitters were against top-level competition, such as the historic game on the right of the screen, August 28, 1912 in Atlantic City. Redding held the Cuban Stars hitless in the Lincoln Giants' 1-0 win. Gary Asheville wrote in 2012 that this game, quote, "appears to be for now the earliest known Negro League no-hitter. That is a no-hitter in a game between top-flight Black professional teams in the United States." Redding succeeded against many of the best white players of his time. Paul Hovland's book, Great Pitchers of the Negro Leagues, reports that Redding struck out Babe Ruth 3 times on 9 pitches one day. Ty Cobb famously asked out of the lineup once Redding entered in an exhibition in Connecticut in 1916. The Norwich Bulletin in Connecticut reported the next day that Redding, quote, "was given a great ovation by the crowd, to whom he proved much more of an attraction than the high-salaried Cobb." And the Chicago Defender box score on the left of the screen documents Redding outdueling Carl Mays in 1919 in a 14-inning game. And that same year, Mays had a 2.10 ERA in 34 games for the Boston Red Sox and New York Yankees. As you see in that one, Hall of Famers Pop Lloyd and Ben Taylor were Redding's teammates that day. Negro Leagues author and historian Larry Hogan said, "No one equaled Redding when it came to winning big games against major league competition." And of course, at the time that Larry said that, he's referring to the American League and the National League. If you feel winning league championships is an important criteria for a Hall of Famer, Redding has that box checked. The Center for Negro League Baseball Research found that Redding pitched for at least 15 championship teams during his career. What was Dick Redding like as a person? Here's a quote from longtime Negro League shortstop Jake Stevens. "He was one of the finest men you ever saw. He didn't enjoy money, he just enjoyed life. He was a clean-cut, clean-living man. There will never be another Dick Redding." Redding missed most of the 1918 season to serve in the military. He was assigned to the 24th Infantry at Camp Upton, New York, and later saw combat in France in World War I. Redding earned the nickname Grenade for his brave work in the battlefield. He was later buried with honors at Long Island National Cemetery because of his service in World War I. I think all of you have thought about this part already, but I think this would be a really important part if Redding was inducted, much like how we learned so much about Bud Fowler's journey after his induction, and baseball fans all around the country learned about Fowler and what he went through. I don't think baseball fans everywhere have thought about a player like Redding. Segregation kept him away from the American League and the National League, but it didn't keep him away from going to war. All of you have thought about that, but I think that would be a really important part that fans around the country would learn about that part of history. All right. I'm winding down here for those of you keeping track of the pitch clock. What did people who saw Redding firsthand say about him? Hall of Famer Cumberland Posey was a player, manager, and executive in the pre-Negro Leagues and Negro Leagues from 1911 through 1946. And Posey made a list of his all-black team. He ranked Redding the second best pitcher he ever saw. Only Hall of Famer Smokey Joe Williams was ranked higher. Satchel Paige was ranked third. Hall of Famer Ben Taylor, old reliable. When talking about Redding's fastball, he said, quote, "It was impossible to hit it. I know because I've tried." I thought this is significant because Taylor was known as a contact hitter. He batted .330 and more than 1,000 known games in the Seamheads Negro Leagues database. Right there on his plaque, it described him as a line drive hitter. And if he's calling Redding's fastball impossible to hit, that's very high praise. Hall of Famer Buck Leonard spoke of Redding's character, saying he was a nice fellow, easygoing, never argued, never cursed, never smoked, as I recall. Leonard played with and was managed by Redding. Casey Stengel played against Redding at Bushwick Park in Brooklyn and said years later, "You can have Satchel Paige. I'll have Cannonball Redding." Hall of Fame manager John McGraw also praised Redding after seeing him pitch. In 2021, the 42 for 21 committee polled about 80 Negro Leagues experts, including some of you here today. And they asked which Negro League candidates should be inducted into the Hall of Fame. It was a thorough ballot listing 116 candidates. And out of all 116 candidates, Rap Dixon and Dick Redding were the top two choices. Here are the 15 Hall of Fame pitchers whose greatest impact came in the dead ball era. 13 of the 15 played in the American League and or the National League. Just 2 made their greatest impact in the pre-Negro Leagues. If you're wondering where Cy Young is, I didn't include him on the left column because of all his time in the 19th century. There are more pre-Negro Leagues position players in the Hall of Fame who were Redding's contemporaries, like Pete Hill, Louis Santop, Ben Taylor, Pop Lloyd, and others, than there are pitchers, Jose Mendez and Joe Williams. I think you can make a case that Black pitchers from this era are underrepresented in the Hall of Fame. So in closing, I believe the evidence shows that Redding was one of the most dominant pitchers of his era in any league, and I feel he's worthy of baseball's ultimate honor. Thanks so much. This has been an honor, and really appreciate SABR, the Hall of Fame, and Ted for the invite.